Dear friends, welcome to First Unitarian Universalist Church of Rochester. So glad you are here and able to join with us from across the world, across this town, and right here in our sanctuary. I'm Reverend Luke Stevens Royer, minister here. Welcome, dear friends, to this gathering of souls across time and space, gathered in such a time in our world of uncertainty, a time of rapid change and adaptation. We gather in longing to be together from so many places, and while being in this shared space, the sanctuary would be best, we're also so grateful for the ways we can gather here to keep each other safe and healthy and well. The service stretches normal practice, and we enter it with gratitude and with grace for each other. So for every little glitch or technical challenge that may arise, we take that as a reminder of our shared humanity, our shared fragility, our figuring it out as we go in this world, which in fact we are always doing in so many ways. To make meaning in these lives, we figure it out as we go. So today, this is how we gather to grieve, to remember, to celebrate a life. We gather here in story and in song and in sacred memory because a dear loved one has died, but most importantly, because a dear loved one has lived. We gather here in honor and memory of Jasper Daube, who lived a full life. Son and husband, father, grandfather, doctor, caretaker, researcher, community and church volunteer, and so many other things. Lover of life and truth and wisdom and learning and science and medicine and family. Lover of this world. You'll be hearing throughout this service reflections from family, from friends and colleagues gathered remotely from all over in real time, telling you the deeper story of who Jasper was. And while we gather in a time of distance and uncertainty, and we feel the distance now of Jasper's absence, the distance in so many ways, yet and still we believe that love can come to us in these times, that there's a thread of memory and love that weaves us together. There are things we can still be sure of how love and story and life seem to linger on in the way that Jasper made an impact on this world, on our own hearts and lives. Someone known for being strong-willed and compassionate, someone known as being a justice seeker, and someone who, as Cynthia said, was someone you really wanted on your board. I knew Jasper just a few short years serving as minister here, but hearing so many stories, almost all of them appropriate and good, many of them. All of them about a person who cared for his family and for this community and for this church. One story recently about how Jasper would pick up Owen and Gwen when they were little and take them to practice their instruments with Grandma. And you'll hear some of that music today. And we know yet there is not one story, one service, one gathering, be it online or in person, that can hold all of a life. Not one story or gathering or service can hold all who they were, all that they meant. And that's why it takes us all to hold part of them, each of us holding part of who Jasper was, to carry on his legacies, to carry on his love in 1,000 ways, unique to each of us. And so, as we are in uncertain times, we turn to the poets, who try always to put into words what seems beyond words or describable, what words can hold together life and love and death. Poet Kathleen Horb writes it this way: "And do I die? How should I die? My atoms are the same that existed on the first day of the universe. My elements are identical with the makeup of the stars. I am one with all that is, and brief, like a comet's trail across the starry universal night. I do not die. My elements are scattered. New lights, new comets' trails will use them. There is, because of me, a new note in the song that is sung by the morning stars." For another note in the Song of the Morning Stars will light our chalice. Our tradition of this chalice lighting is it is for us a symbol of hope and grace, justice and welcome, a beacon of spiritual freedom and a more loving world. Cynthia will light the chalice in Jasper's honor and memory.
Thank you. Welcome for coming today, for joining us today. Deep breath. Maida Riedemann, a farm girl from Uetersen, Germany, and Jasper's mother met and married August Kurt Daube, called Roy, on a visit to the U.S. Though married, she was sent back to Germany due to visa restrictions, pregnant with my father. Jasper Rolf Ludwig Daube was born on Maida's family farm in Uetersen on February 16th, 1936. Maida and Jasper immigrated to the U.S. in 1937. Technically, she was a British citizen since Roy was an Australian, but she didn't speak much English. They first lived in Minneola, New York, and then moved to Chicago while Dad was still very young. This is my father as a child, and that's her immigration card. I think she came through Ellis Island. 2 years after my father, Lisa, was born, she recently wrote to me and said she was very proud of her big brother and that he urged her to study hard and find some kind of a goal that would not only pay her, but enrich her life. She says at the time that he told her that, she didn't really understand what she meant, but now she really appreciates his wisdom. That's her in the pram and him pulling her in the wagon. She also tells some very funny stories about Dad when he was a kid. I guess he was a bit of a prankster. He would hide under the apartment stairs for even up to a half an hour and jump out and scare her, which she said was pretty effective. He also came up with the idea of using a BB gun to shoot out the street lamps with his buddy Reggie. This one landed the future Dr. J.R. Daube almost in jail. The family lived in a small apartment over their grocery store in Villa Park outside Chicago. Dad's father, Roy, was a professional baker, providing the shop with baked goods as well as homemade ice cream. That's Roy in the front there and Maida in the back on the right. When Dad was 9, his younger sister Sue was born. Sue remembers his great laugh when something really tickled him. She said sometimes he'd laugh until he'd almost be crying. She remembers also the way he always asked about people's hopes and plans. He always seemed to be interested in everyone and how they were doing and what they were doing with their lives. He had a good time when people were around. That's my dad as a young man there on the left. He looks remarkably like my kids, and Dad and his sisters in the inset. In high school, Dad participated in track and in theater, enjoying theater throughout his life. In the 70s and 80s, my parents had season tickets to the Guthrie in Minneapolis, driving up with a gourmet picnic dinner accompanied by friends. More recently, he loved to attend theater at the Rep and at the Civic Theater, though I don't think he performed theater after high school. Dad attended York Community High School, graduating in 1953. He applied to all the Ivies and was accepted to all of them, but got the best deal from Princeton and a full ride, though it was tough going from an immigrant grocery store background to an East Coast Ivy, and he struggled a bit to fit in. At Princeton, at the time, they had exclusive eating clubs, but Dad, being the independent thinker that he was, he didn't want to join one. So he insisted, and he instead bought a hot plate and cooked in the basement. He eventually did find his niche, though, in the form of 6 roommates: John are Jack Goodman, Jerry Greenwald, Don Cretin, Murray Payton, and Dick McCready. And Jack recently shared a funny story with me. He said it was an autumn day when Murray came back to the room with a couple large bushels of apples. Jasper asked him what he was going to do with them, and Murray thought for a moment and said, "Make applesauce. Will you help me, Jasper?" And so Dad agreed, and from about 5 p.m. into the wee hours of the morning, the two of them boiled apples in the community bathroom on Jasper's electric hot plate. They ended up with about 5 gallons of glass jugs of applesauce, and the tile floor in the bathroom was covered with slippery apple skins. He says, a couple of us cursed the squalid mess of the facilities. Meanwhile, Jasper and Murray sat around eating yummy bowls of freshly made applesauce. Later that day, the university custodial staff questioned what was going on in the bathroom and who made the big mess. And Jasper replied, "What mess?" Still kind of a prankster. Dad stayed friends with those college roommates throughout his life. There's a couple more shots of my dad in those days. They traveled together throughout their life, all the way up into their 70s with their wives. Jerry wrote me recently, he was the most focused human being I've ever met, from studying to running the 100-yard dash. Here he is, running that 100-yard dash in the 2:20 and getting written up in the local paper for winning his race. After college, Dad attended the University of Rochester Medical School in Rochester, New York. Though many of his peers were joining the war effort, Dad participated in the Berry program that allowed physicians to complete their medical training before joining the military. Pictured right is a picture from the medical school yearbook when he was performing his class skit. Immediately after medical school, he attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison for residency, and then began his military duty. He was sent first to the NIH in Washington, and then to Camp Zuma Hospital in Japan. He lived in Japan for 2.5 years. It was in Japan where he met my mother, the love of his life, and Army nurse, Cynthia Sokol. They both lived in the BOQ, as she called it, the Bachelor's Office Quarters, which also housed a club cafeteria where the officers socialized. Both of them were dating other people at the time, but when they started hanging out, one thing led to another, she says, and they fell in love. They were married at the American Embassy and a few other offices. In the upper right is a telegram that my mom received from her parents congratulating them on their wedding. In Japan, they wear red for weddings, and so my mom wore red to her wedding. For the 52 years of marriage, my parents deeply cared for each other. They were a classic 50s couple in many ways, him working to provide for the family and staying home to cook wonderful meals, or him providing for the family and mom staying home to cook wonderful meals, baking bread and treats, and taking care of all of us. But regardless of his 50s tendencies, Dad always was a big supporter of women, and especially his wife. He supported Mom when she went back to college for a degree in food history, and then through the opening of the bakeries and restaurants. But the care went both ways. Mom always made sure all of his needs were taken care of and that he was well dressed, not one of his fortes. I remember one occasion when Mom was out of town and he went to work wearing one penny loafer and one wingtip shoe. And instead of driving the 1 mile back to the house from the clinic to change shoes, he just stood with one foot kind of behind him for the whole day and one foot kind of under the chair. But that was typical. Most notably, though, my mom took care of Dad through the last 10 years as he declined due to Alzheimer's. My brother and I had to coerce her to get help, and when we were worried about her own health and well-being, and she was just very resistant up to a few months ago, when she really did need some help. Back to the timeline, later in 1968, my brother Chris was born. I'd never seen the picture in the upper right before. He looks exhausted. Dad loved babies. He loved playing and caring for his own children as well as my children, my brother's children when they were young. He just didn't do diapers. My mom tells a funny story of when she was sick in bed with 101 fever and he was caring for baby Chris. And he walked into the bedroom with Chris, holding up Chris with a dirty diaper and a clean diaper in his other hand and said, "I brought him to you," thinking that was doing her a big favor. Soon after the birth, Dad accepted a fellowship at Mayo and the couple moved from Japan to Rochester. Dad loved kids and to get kids engaged. He started educating both my brother and I, and then our kids from a very young age. He always used the Socratic method, letting us work through the question ourselves and then not just giving us the answers. He taught me how to think through problems and question my own assumptions. On the left, he works with Chris on a project here at the church in the basement. Someone might recognize the background there. And on the right, he's introducing Owen, my youngest, to the computer. Owen is now a computer science major at DePaul College, so this was his little intro to his future. A year after moving to Rochester, I was born. I love this picture because my dad liked to make fun of my moods and reflecting back at me, my pouty lip. Growing up with Dad seemed normal to my brother and I until we realized that some of our family practices were a bit out of the ordinary. We had family dinners every night with dessert. He loved dessert. Even when, on doctor's orders, he had to lose some weight, he would eat only an apple all day long, all through his workday, come home, have a full dinner with dessert. Although the schedule of our family dinners varied by what time Dad got home, because of course the patients come first, the family dinners had a variety of entertainments. We often got demonstrations of the presentation of neurological disorders, which we all learned to mimic. Seasonally, we had the opportunity to renegotiate our family contract. These contracts were things like how late we could stay out in the evening or how many sleepovers we could have per month and that sort of thing. My mom points out that these were not really executed to their T, but they gave us an opportunity to learn how that we got to participate in the making of the rules, how to argue our own case, how to negotiate in general. It also was pretty entertaining for the neighborhood kids who would come over and see this typed up contract with signatures on it, take to the fridge. On the rare night that Mom was planning out at a church meeting or at a planning meeting, Dad brought home contraband. And that was at one point of the form of a book entitled Mouth Sounds, where it was one of those books that you could pull the record out of the back that they used to have in the old days. And we practiced imitating dripping water with our mouth and tearing paper and some other more inappropriate sounds. That was always a good time. Christmas was and still is a very important holiday for our family. Though Chris and I were raised in the UU church, we've always celebrated a traditional Christmas, a live tree, big bulb Christmas lights, and of course, a fantastic meal. Chris and I had always given my dad credit for the giant Tinker Toy tunnel that led from the bottom of the staircase to the tree, or the fishing line that led to the presents, but it turns out those were my mom's innovations. The lasting tradition that definitely belongs to my father is the one we still practice today, and that's cluing our presents. So each person gets a present not only with a name tag, but with a clue on it. And you must read the clue and make some guesses prior to opening the gift. I didn't appreciate initially what that did, but it actually really slows down the process of opening presents and sort of lets you really connect with the person who you're giving the present to. So it's a really wonderful tradition. Though he wasn't he was the most disciplined man I've ever met, he was also fun. He was very willing to be playful. He loved to dress up for Renaissance Festival. This one was from a Renaissance Festival that Lincoln School put on when I was a kid, but he's dressed up for a number of the church Renaissance festivals and never had a problem playing. I remember one Halloween in the 70s, when Dad shaved off the big caterpillar mustache he'd been wearing for years and put on some black long johns and pulled a stocking over his head and turned himself into a burglar and just scared the crap out of my brother. And we had no idea who he was. He didn't look like him. The condo is my parents' lake home. Here's all of us, or many of us, at the lake home, and it's been an important place throughout my life. Started going there when I was, 7 or 8, winter and summer, and still gather there today. At the condo, you had the chance of prying Dad away from work. He loved to cross-country ski, canoe, play tennis, play board games. A favorite, pictured here on the bottom right, is Chinese checkers, which we coined Chinese torture because the game took so long to play. When Dad was asked by Mayo for a retirement statement about his greatest accomplishment outside of work, he said, assisting in the establishment of the best bakery and restaurant in southeastern Minnesota through quality control, eating the products. He was not only very proud of the bakery, he truly loved pastries. Dad was instrumental in many aspects of Mom's bakeries and restaurants. He helped develop training plans, assisted with organizational management, as well as being quality control. On most evenings, he was a fixture at her restaurant, which was fittingly named Jasper's. In 2006, Mom and Dad decided to take all of us, their children and grandchildren, on a number of all expenses paid trips that we would otherwise never have had the opportunity to take together. For the first trip, all 12 of us went to Kona Village on Hawaii's main island, on the bottom right there. Next, we took the Amtrak from Red Wing to Whitefish, Montana to a dude ranch where we all learned to ride horses as well as sort and lasso steer. Then we took a bicycle trip around the Loire Valley in France, and lastly, a cruise through the Galapagos Islands. These trips were not only a wonderful time to connect with family, but educational, enriching, and providing lasting memories for all of us that we will hold dear forever. In addition to being a wonderful and caring father and a provider for our family, I learned my father gave me 3 unique gifts. He gave me the ability to think creatively and out of the box. And as an artist, I really appreciate that. I learned that your first answer isn't necessarily the right one. Second, he demonstrated that true kindness does not necessarily mean being nicey-nice. It means being empathetic and listening, meeting people where they are and bringing them along in your thinking. And finally, that the best way to learn and to teach is to start with the right question. Thank you.
Let the life I've lived speak for me. Let the life I've lived speak for me. At the end of my day, when there's nothing more to say, let the life I've lived speak for me. Let the friends I keep speak for me. Let the friends I keep speak for me. At the end of my day, when there's nothing more to say, let the life I've lived speak for me.
My first impression of Jasper was that he was very sharp, maybe even a bit prickly, if you will. Sometimes he barked at us when we were kids, or made us watch PowerPoints full of photos from trips he went on with Cynthia. I remember early on, during some holiday at my grandparents' house, I tried to escape one of these PowerPoints. It was extremely futile. During most of these visits, my siblings and I would migrate to the basement to play games. like clockwork, at some point Jasper would come down, just to see what we were up to, and then perhaps to join us in a game of pool. I'm pretty confident that he liked hanging out with his grandkids more than the grown-ups. Maybe this was different for his own kids or for my step-siblings. I don't expect that it is. But for a man that was so brilliant, so driven, so accomplished, Jasper never offered me a lot of direct advice. More often than not, he had questions about events in my life and that of my siblings. He was always keen to hear about college, the subjects that we studied, or our latest jobs. He even borrowed a couple of my books, which I never saw ever again. This past fall and winter, I'd often make a monthly stop in Rochester to spend the night on my way up north. By these times, Jasper was not in a state to discuss matters as he had been in the past. We had to speak in more brief and general terms. Nonetheless, I still remember what he would ask me each time I arrived. "Where have you been?" Not sure exactly what to say, as I would reply, "I've been in Wisconsin, Jasper." He would not respond immediately, so I thought maybe he was unsatisfied with that answer. And then after some time, he'd ask me another question. "Do you like where you are headed?" And with that, it would be my turn to stop and reflect. I really love that question, and I think everybody could probably take a minute at some point in the next few days to think hard about it in Jasper's memory. So even after his faculties had faded, Jasper was still pushing for the most important answers. I'll always be inspired by his mind and the steadfast curiosity that he never lost. And I'll always be thankful to him and to Cynthia for taking me into the family. Thank you.
Hi, for those who don't know me, I'm Andrea Daube, Chris's daughter and Jasper's granddaughter. I'll be reading a letter that was important to Jasper. It was written by Abraham Lincoln to the headmaster of the school in which his son was studying. It is titled, "A Word to Teachers." "You will have to learn, I know, that all men are not just and are not true. But teach him, if you can, the wonder of books. But also give him quiet time to ponder the eternal mystery of birds in the sky, bees in the sun, and flowers on a green hillside. In school, teach him it is far more honorable to fail than to cheat. Teach to have faith in his own ideas, even if everyone tells him he is wrong. Teach him to be gentle with gentle people and tough with the tough. Try to give my son the strength not to follow the crowd when everyone is getting on the bandwagon. Teach him to listen to all men, but teach him to also filter all he hears through a screen of truth and take only the good that comes through it. Teach him, if you can, how to laugh when he is sad. Teach him there is no shame in tears. Teach him to scoff at cynics and to beware of too much sweetness. Teach him to sell his brown brain to highest bidders, but never to put a price on his heart and soul. Teach him to close his ears to a howling mob and stand and fight if he thinks he is right. Treat him gently, but do not coddle him, because only the test of fire makes fine steel. Let him have the courage to be impatient. Let him have the patience to be brave. Teach him always to be sublime faith in himself, because then he will have faith in humankind. This is a big order, but see what you can do. He is such a fine little fellow, my son." By Abraham Lincoln. Thank you.
When I was born, when my mother and stepfather got married, Grandpa Jasper was the only male influence I had in my life. And he was always great at entertaining the kids. And his favorite games to play weren't sports or any of that stuff, but games of the mind instead. As a young boy, he shared his love of chess with me, and he took me to group lessons to help improve my game. When I was older, he put a pool table in the basement, and me and him would spend hours a day measuring out angles and plotting ball placement. This interest in strategic thinking led to an interest in math for me, and from there to computers, and then to coding, which is what I go to school for today. I attribute a lot of my personality to my grandfather, and I really hope to pass the love of thinking that he gave me down to my own children. You left the world a better place because of your work, Grandpa. I'm really gonna miss you.
Much like the rest of my siblings have said, my grandfather was very interested in keeping us entertained and also educating us. Oh no, am I muted? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Okay. My grandpa was always very entertained us, but also educated us throughout my childhood. And some of my most formative memories of him were, well, one summer I was really bored at his house, and he asked me if I wanted to help him with some of his research. And I gladly agreed, and he handed me a large stack of papers full of squiggly lines that I had no idea what they were, but he told me to just count all the times that the lines spiked on the page. And so he told me he would give me a quarter for every page that I completed, and I probably ended up with $2 at the end because I couldn't do it. But it was my first foray into science, and it really reflects on the kind of work that I do now as a researcher at the University of Washington in Seattle. And I really just miss him and appreciate everything that he gave to me as a kid, including picking me up every morning before school to practice my cello. And now I'll play for you a song on the cello, The Swan by Camille Saint-Saëns.
Thank you. It's really an honor and a privilege to speak about Jasper and about his time at the Mayo Clinic. So Jasper came to Mayo, as we heard, doing his as a neurophysiology fellow, and he had an interest in EEG when he had finished his neurology residency at the University of Wisconsin. But it was during his fellowship that he met Ed Lambert, really the father of EMG, and it was through Ed's mentorship that Jasper developed his interest in EMG, which really became the focus of his clinical and research interests, and one that led to over 150 peer-reviewed manuscripts, and he served as author and editor of a landmark book titled The Clinical Neurophysiology. Jasper was instrumental in the development of the Mayo EMG laboratory, and beyond serving as lab director, he mentored really a majority of the Mayo EMG faculty at Mayo in Rochester, in Arizona, and in Florida. He pioneered the surgical intraoperative neurophysiology monitoring practice here and really was a major contributor across this field. Dr. Daube was a professor of neurology at Mayo, and he was our department chair from 1988 to 1997. In fact, he was chair at the time that I was recruited. Perhaps his greatest shield across the various Mayo shields of practice, research, and education was in fact education. He taught numerous medical students, residents, trainees, clinical neurophysiology fellows. Internally, he had won the Neurology Resident Teacher of the Year award several times, eventually being elected into the Mayo Teaching Hall of Fame. He was named a Distinguished Educator by the Mayo Foundation, which is the highest honor a Mayo educator can receive. And he was recognized in 2008 by the American Academy of Neurology with the A.B. Baker Award for Lifetime Achievement in Education. Dr. Daube also received the American Neurological Association Distinguished Neurology Teacher Award. Jasper pioneered the recognition of teachers at a national level by developing the first national program for recognition of teachers of neurology, the Mayo Visiting Professor of Neurologic Education program. In 1972, Dr. Daube initiated the neuroscience program in the new Mayo Medical School. He and his colleagues had developed a unique program in neurosciences, which served as a basis of neurology for first-year medical students, was really ahead of its time, and it set the tone for teaching across the entire medical school. Their book, entitled Medical Neurosciences, is based on this curriculum. Dr. Daube also played a major role at the American Academy of Neurology and held many positions. He was treasurer of the AN, Vice Chair of the AN Foundation for Research and Education, Vice Chair of the AN Quality Standards Committee, Chair of the AN Section of Clinical Neurophysiology, and Chair of the AN Animal Studies Subcommittee, as well as Chair of the AN Quality Improvement Subcommittee and Vice Chair of the AN Workforce Task Force. He was also Chair of the AN EMG course and advanced seminar from 1975 to 1981 and gave countless talks at the AN. I wanted to share several reflections from our faculty and our prior trainees. I could spend the entire day doing that. There were so many people who had so much to share about the impact Jasper had on their lives, and I'll just share a few. Alan Wright, one of our prior EMG fellows, talked about how Jasper was a great teacher. He said, "I enjoyed working with him during my 4 years at Mayo, especially during my EMG fellowship. He was a formidable figure, and he always kept you on your toes. I always found him tough but fair. I enjoyed the evenings he held at his home for residents and fellows. Jasper was always very good to the New Zealanders who he taught over the years." Another colleague of ours, David Dodick, shared that Jasper was a mentor and a friend. David mentioned that he recruited him to the field of headache, arranging for a Mayo Foundation scholar to train abroad, recruiting him onto the staff, and as David said, inspired me to always strive for excellence. He led by example and expected no less of anyone than he expected of himself. David shared that, "I remember fondly and vividly the many Leinenkugel and Pizza Journal clubs at his home, sitting around an invited expert in his living room. I never wanted to miss them." David said, "I remembered him strolling by my office at 7 or 8 p.m. That was not by accident, telling me to pack up and go home to be with my family. And he wouldn't do it in that way and he would do it, in the way that only Jasper could. Have you had dinner? Has your wife and son had dinner? Do you think it might be a good idea that you all ate together?" Up to his last days when he was practicing, David shared that he would routinely get calls from Jasper while he was seeing patients at the prison to run a case by him. David said, "I was simply beyond honored that someone I revered as one of the smartest neurologists I will ever know would be calling me for advice on a patient. Later, of course, the penny dropped, and I realized that we often talked about life and family more than the case itself, and he was mainly just checking in and checking up on a friend." John Noseworthy, our prior chair and CEO, shared that Jasper loved Mayo Clinic and the people of Mayo Clinic. His many acts of kindness, as John shared, were usually done privately, quietly, often in a way that no one knew who was behind them. If you ever tried to thank Jasper for something he did for you or your program, he always turned your efforts into praise, focusing on your role in the success that was achieved. As John shared, he was a tough man to thank. He was by far the most effective recruiter, John mentioned, that he had ever met, and many of us, including myself, learned from him how to bring talent to move to Rochester. Jasper would move heaven and earth to find out what this person might have wanted regarding the community, support, employment, recreation, any other interests, spending almost more time putting those pieces together than any other aspects of the recruitment. Jasper also was a champion of diversity, and John pointed out that the importance of diversity was appreciated broadly by the profession Jasper was extremely committed to. This, of course, was really fortunate. Those of us who were able to see this visionary pioneer move our thinking on diversity saw this play out every year in the residency match and in the recruitment and promotion within the department. Jasper was a visionary leader. He was one of the first at the Mayo Clinic to realize that the old ways needed to change. And as John mentioned, if Mayo was going to be successful, Jasper knew that in this era of subspecialization and technology, the importance of efficiency and productivity. Jasper was courageous to bring these pioneering thoughts to the department, and with time, we all would learn that he was right. As John closed, he said he was an amazing example to all of us. He left his mark on us who had the privilege to work with him, and we are better for these. We have long stood on his shoulders. Bob Brown, another chair, said that another noteworthy aspect of Jasper's vision was the concept of one Mayo department, long before this concept of enterprise departments came to be, again highlighting Jasper's vision. He was a strong advocate of departmental collaborations across all of Mayo, and his philosophy on this topic really led the chairs, all of us, to be following in his strong advocacy of a one Mayo mindset. In my own career, Jasper taught me about what it means to be a compassionate clinician. I saw it the very first week I was scheduled as a resident in neurology, my first week at campus, and I was scheduled to work with Jasper Daube, the chair of the department. It was highly stressful, but what I really took back and noted at that time was one example when we went in and he shared the news with a patient receiving a devastating diagnosis of ALS. I just remember how compassionate and kind he was with this patient. And as we came out of the room, he knew that he had a new learner on his hands who witnessed all of that. And he said to me, "Claudia, if you feel like crying, that's the right thing to feel. Perhaps you want to go back and speak a little more with the patient." He also pushed me to take risks, all of us to take risks. But in my own career, he pushed me to travel to Austria and do a Mayo scholarship. He taught all of us to think on our feet and to strive for excellence. He also had a humorous side. And that same first week as a new resident, he said to me, "Claudia, what do you think is the best high school in all of Chicago?" And I said, "I don't know, New Trier?" He said, "No, it's York High School, of course. We both went there." I was also a graduate of the high school that I had an honor to share with Jasper Daube. He challenged us to push ourselves. And in addition, in terms of taking on leadership roles, I recall when I was a new staff coming back from my training, first day on the job, that he put me into a role to really help lead an initiative in the department. Again, just showing this type of confidence he had not only in me, but in all of us, and being able to help us learn how to tackle change and develop skills to work through challenges. It is those learnings that have helped us all during this time, and Jasper has helped us never to settle for the status quo and invest in one another. Jasper's influence on the Mayo Clinic in general and on the Department of Neurology in particular is hard to measure, but it is massive. No less significant is his impact on neurologists whom he taught from around the world and trainees he has mentored from around the world, many of them joining you here during this visit. We will miss Jasper, but he leaves a legacy that will last forever. Thank you.
Well, as I was thinking of what I wanted to share about Jasper, I happened to come across a letter that I wrote to Jasper about 20 years ago. And it was the time that I was just about to move from Rochester, Minnesota here to Jacksonville. And as I reread this letter, I think that the words that I wrote to him back then continued to be true over the years and still hold true today. And I would like to share this letter that I wrote to him with all of you. Jasper, I wanted to take a moment to express my gratitude to you for everything that you have done for me over the last few years. I don't think that I can truly convey in these brief words the appreciation that I have for your guidance, mentorship, and friendship. I cannot begin to describe how much you have taught me, not only about neurology and EMG, but about commitment and dedication to practicing and teaching something that we both greatly enjoy, and more importantly, about life. You are truly an exceptional educator, and I only strive to be as effective and innovative of a teacher as you are throughout my own career. I want to thank you for including me in the many projects, courses, and educational endeavors that we have been involved together over the years. Each and every one of those experiences have not only been educational, such as some of those very late night discussions on intricate details of EMG waveforms, and my wife can certainly attest to that. There were some many very late nights. But it's also been rewarding developing enduring educational products that will be useful to many others as they care for their own patients. I have always felt honored that you asked me to be involved in these projects with you. Finally, I want to thank you for the support that you have given me while I was struggling with the decision to move to Jacksonville. I never felt that it was fair to ask for your input, as I felt that in many respects I would be letting you down by leaving. However, I trusted and valued your perspective, as I always did. Although there are many people in Rochester I will miss, without a doubt, what I will miss the most is working with you and learning from you on a daily basis. It comforts me to know that we will continue our work together from a distance. I know that these words do not do justice in expressing the respect and admiration that I have for you. Thanks again for everything. With great respect, Devin. And I think that these sentiments that I wrote to Jasper 20 years ago truly encompass what Jasper meant to me and to my wife, Erin. He was tough. He was thoughtful, persistent, critical, brilliant, innovative, and visionary. He had the best interests of his patients and his students at heart. And he strived to do the best and teach us to do the best because our patients deserve the best. Jasper will be greatly missed by so many, but I know that his great legacy will continue on for many generations through the many, many students and colleagues that he trained and through the students that they in turn have trained. So Jasper, thank you for all that you have done for our field, for society, and for me. You will be missed and you will be thought of very, very often. Thank you.
Jasper had a great impact on my life in many ways, but I still remember the first day I met him. It was and Cynthia, it was some 43 years ago in 1977. It was on a Saturday, July 23rd, about 3:30 in the afternoon. We were on a bus trip going to Red Wing, Minnesota, for the purpose of getting on a riverboat to spend the rest of the evening traveling up and down the Mississippi River. It was my first scientific session, summer scientific session, and I'd been at Mayo for about 3 or 4 weeks. After Pat and I sat down on the bus, imbibing some refreshments as were available, I looked across the aisle to see this almost middle-aged couple laughing, giggling, hugging, and necking. He looked up, noticed I was looking at them, stuck out his hand and said, "Hi, I'm Jasper Daube, and this is my wife, Cynthia." I had no idea who he was, but I certainly learned later. I tell this story really to tell and illustrate one of his strengths, that of an educator. Even before I met him, he was teaching me a lesson. And typical of his education style, it was with few words and good example. The lesson, and it's not what you may be thinking, was to play hard when you're playing. 2 years later, when I was starting in the EMG lab, I learned the yin of that yang. And that is, when you're working, work hard. And he often reminded me, when you are working hard at what you love to do, it is like playing. Like so many, I consider Jasper a mentor, but also a friend. The mentoring started right away, while the friendship came later. I know I was not the greatest mentee, but I really tried. One of, and I think there are many frustrations that he had with me, was related to his planning abilities, of which they were very strong. From the beginning, he would ask me, "What is your 5-year plan?" I'm sure many of you heard that. He would grimace, maybe even strain a little at the collar when I would respond, "5-year plan? I'm still working on tomorrow." As a mentor, he did so many things for me. And for most of them, I am so appreciative. He made sure I met all of his colleagues, both international and national. He made sure I was involved in the correct organizations and was correctly involved with them. And he showed me how to, and probably how not to, direct the EMG lab. I certainly could go on with these things, and you've heard so many of them already. But getting back to the 5-year plan, knowing how important it was to him, I was often able to get insight into where he was headed in the not too distant future. Jasper was an amazing visionary. Well, I think one of his greatest strengths, and he accomplished so many things in both his professional career and in other pursuits. I admired this in him, and I always wished I could get beyond a day. He was also quiet about those things he was planning, but knowing he had a rolling 5-year plan and listening very carefully about what he was talking about, I could prepare for the next things he was going to do. Jasper was also a friend, and I could relive so many great times we had with him, our family with their family. I won't do that except to tell a story. One year, when our children were young, we had Thanksgiving dinner with the Daubes. Great time. The grandchildren could tell you some of the things that went on when they got together, so I won't go through that. But after dinner, we got the sleds out. Yeah, it was snowing that day. And we went across the street to St. Mary's Hill, and most everyone, including Jasper, was sliding down the hill. We had a great time. We were among the couples that traveled to Minneapolis. I think we did that for a dozen years with them, to the Guthrie Theater, sharing in the gourmet dinners as we drove in the car, and then a little cheesecake after the play at the Lincoln Dell. Lizzie may remember that she spent many of those evenings babysitting our young children. Those stories and many more, I could give it to you, but I won't bore you with them. I will remember Jasper as a visionary and dedicated and passionate about whatever he did. I will remember him as an educator who had high standards for those he taught, and the students knew it. I will remember Jasper questioning and me pleased it was not my turn. I will remember him as a person who truly loved his family, with clinical neurophysiology second, but really a distant second. I simply will remember Jasper. Let me conclude my comments by revisiting the final comment I made when talking to the Department of Neurology celebration dinner nearly 10 years ago at Jasper's retirement. And I quote, "It is not without some irony that I will conclude my remarks with a quote from a famous visionary educator, the German Lutheran theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was a brilliant theologian, but was executed in German concentration camp just 2 days before it was liberated. Early in his career, he had the opportunity to speak at a retirement celebration of one of his mentors, someone instrumental in helping him evolve in his own thinking, but in the end, he had diverged from his mentor's approach to theology. He simply said, that you were my teacher for many sessions is a thing of the past, but that we may call you ourselves your pupils will remain still." Thank you.
Come, let us stroll down Lover's Lane, once more to sing love's old refrain. Soon we must say auf Wiedersehen, my dear. Here in your arms I can't remain, so let me kiss you once again. Soon we must say auf Wiedersehen, auf Wiedersehen, my dear. Your love will cling to me through the lonely daytime. Each night will bring to me the magic memory of Maytime. I know my heart won't beat again until the day we Sweetheart, goodbye, auf Wiedersehen, auf Wiedersehen, my dear. Your love will cling to me through the lonely daytime. Each night will bring to me the magic memory of Maytime. I know my heart won't beat again until the day we meet again. Sweetheart, goodbye, auf Wiedersehen, auf Wiedersehen, my dear.
Thank you all for the beautiful reflections, stories, helping to paint a picture, even if it's only partial, of who Jasper was. The rest we hold in our own hearts. I invite you, wherever you're gathered, to take a deep breath. I invite you to place your hand over your heart or open them toward the bright morning stars and breathe deep the breath of life. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember him. In the blowing of the wind and the chill of winter, in the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, in the blueness of the skies and the warmth of summer, in the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, in the beginning of the year and when it ends, we will remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, when we are lost and sick in heart, when we have some joy we crave to share, and when we have achievements that are based on his, we will remember him. Dear Jasper, beloved of earth and sky, of spirit and stars, from the dust and earth from whence you came, this earth you loved so much, so you return. We carry you with us, the nourishment which you instilled in this world, into the embrace of love and light eternal, one with the earth and the stars and the spirit of life. May love hold you and us on our way. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember him. Amen. Before ending with a beautiful slideshow that Owen put together, music, we'll hear a song, a favorite of Jasper's that Connie and Joe will play. Then we'll view the pictures together, and then our time here together will end. May your memories of Jasper be a blessing, hold you in glad and sacred memory in these days.